Hello, it's Claire Obermarck here in our latest episode of our story series Mountains, Rocks and Stones. We're here in Prescott, Arizona at a place called the Granite Dells. It's a really amazing formation of stones. It's about 1.5 billion years old at least, and these granite stones exhumed themselves from the crust of the earth, and as they cooled down and crystallized, they formed all these really funky shapes. And it just looks amazing as you approach the Granite Dells. It's just great, and there's obviously water here as well, and it's an amazing bird sanctuary, and it's just really beautiful. So the unfortunate thing about the Granite Dells is that they have radon concentrations, and there's a really high concentration of uranium here. So it's not somewhere that you'd want to live permanently, and if you do have a house here, it has to be checked regularly for the levels. But the stones themselves are absolutely amazing, and the wildlife love it. So today's story is going to be brought from right over the other side of the world. This version I've got from a storyteller called Jenny Moon, and Jenny Moon says that the coffin stone story was given by Joseph Jacobs in a book of his fairy tales in 1893, but it's thought that he got it from the folklorist M. Balfour in Lincolnshire in 1891, so it makes sense that a couple of years later it went into a book. Lincolnshire is a county, it's in the East Midlands of England. It sits just under Yorkshire, so it's got a long coastline, and like one of the stories in our water series, this area back in the day was underwater. You know, it was boggy, marshland, peatland, so most people there cut the peat and they would have peat fires. But the bogland was really eerie on a night, so they'd do the cutting through the day, obviously, so they could see safe passage out on the narrow tracks and the causeways. And like most bogs, the ghosts and creatures were said to come out when it went dark on a night, and they would inhabit the place and really run amok on an evening. And one night they were being so noisy that the moon herself got fed up with the noise. She'd asked them to pipe down a couple of times, and then it just got past it, and she said, right, that's it, I'm going down to see what all this fuss is about. So she put her cloak on and hid herself, and she came down to Lincolnshire, to the bogways, to see what all the fuss was. And she knew her way around, of course, because she'd been shining a light over it for the best part of eternity at this point, so she felt like she knew the place. But because she wasn't shining, she missed her footing and she tripped over, and she ripped her cloak on a bush, and immediately the bogland ghosts and creatures there, they went towards her and they held her down in a stagnant patch of the sodden ground. And then they went off and they fetched a great flat stone, and they laid it down on top of the moon, and they pushed her down into the ground. And they asked that a little light, one of the little will-o'-the-wikes, they said, right, you be the lantern, you stay by this bush, so we know this is the spot where the moon is. Now, the people in the nearest village to this area, they didn't really notice at first, because they didn't go out at night because of the ghosts and the bogland creatures. But after a few nights, someone said, you know, it's ever so dark, it's pitch black on a night, the moon is nowhere to be seen. And they also noticed that the moans and cries from the bog were getting louder and coming closer around the houses at night. And then eventually some people started sleeping in shifts or not sleeping at all, and they kept their peat fires and candles burning all night to keep the bogland spirits at bay. And eventually they were out of ideas, and most of them were suffering from exhaustion, because lots of things were happening due to the moon's disappearance. It wasn't just dark. The night hunting animals were suffering without her light. The tides were all strange and they didn't make any sense anymore. Venus was not bright enough to shine the way that the full moon did. and the time was speeding up. So each day only lasted 6 hours. It was a crazy time without the moon. So the village folk felt that they had only one thing left that they could do, and that was to go to the local wise woman. So they went to see the lady at the edge of the village, and they asked her advice, and she said, I think I know what's going on. In the meantime, put salt along your windowsills and thresholds and in all the corners. And she said to the men, go to the bogs tonight and take forked hazel twigs and use them to find where the large oblong stone is. When you find it, that's the coffin stone of the moon. It's near a bush marked with a single star. Speak of this to no one, men. Until it's done, you must put stones in your mouths. So the men did. They put stones in their mouths. They told no one of what she told them to do. And they went out into the bogs in the pitch black. And they thought, oh, this is no good. They just couldn't see a thing. They could not see a thing, and they were scared. And then eventually one of them saw a single light hanging in the air a little way on next to a bush. And when they came closer to it, they could see it hanging on the bush. They could see a single piece of shining material on it. And then they took the hazel twigs and they found the cold front of the coffin stone, and they used their crooks and they raised it out of the water. And as they did so, a great silver light shone up from the ground. The moon was free at last. And as she emerged from the depths, the night creatures and the ghosts shrieked, and they all fell back. And the moon rose back high into the sky and shone down, relieved to be free from the gravestone in the bog. And she never visited Lincolnshire again. Well, that's a funny little tale, isn't it, about a stone? I really like that. It's funny. And I like the way that she asks them to put the stones in their mouths. That's very medieval, isn't it? And it's a really amazing, around these areas here in Arizona, a lot of the towns are what they call dark sky towns, because there's an observatory in Flagstaff, and it means that when the moon comes out, you really understand the power of the moonlight. Not too long ago, I was driving down one of the dark lanes coming home, and the moon just appeared from behind some clouds, and the moonlight hit the road, and not too far away from me on the side of the road were two huge mule deers with big antlers, and I just stood there looking at these beautiful creatures in the moonlight. And it really brings it home when you're in a dark sky town, how beautiful the stars and the moon are of a night. We've had a beautiful full moon last night, and we can see Saturn really well at the moment, and the rings of Saturn. So it's an amazing place for these old stones to be sat, and I'd really love to be here on a full moon and see how it looks in that silhouetted moonlight. I bet it looks amazing. But that's a funny wee story for you from the other side of the world in Lincolnshire. And I have heard some legends about the Granite Dells, and they're just stories about the gold hunters, and they said that there's some gold treasured, buried here and hidden here somewhere. But I'm going to wait for these stories, and find some landscape stories that belong here. But I need to do that appropriately, and so whilst I'm looking out to who to listen to at the moment, I'm bringing this stone series, and I'm just trying to find some interesting places for you, and link it up with a little tale, from somewhere else, which I think works well. I'm just sat watching all these amazing insects hovering over the water here. What an amazing place. Well, I hope you enjoy today's story, and we will bring you a different story next week. Bye-bye.